Greetings, everyone. As you know, I'm Sister Michelle, and we begin the month of April. And for the month of April, we chose to use the topic of social justice in our world today. So, what are the most pressing issues on the plate for social justice today, rather than at the time when our founders began? How has our world changed, and how do we need to change in response to that? So, today, as our first speaker, we have Father Emeka Obiezu. He's an Augustinian priest from Nigeria, and he is the director for the Augustinian Center for Advocacy and Peace. He has a vast experience of leadership positions that include his work as the representative for the Augustinians at the United Nations. So he's got a quality sense of his finger on what is advocacy, what is peace, and what are the justice needs for today. So at this point, I welcome you, Father Emeka, and we're so pleased that you're with us here today.
Thank you, Michelle. This is very interesting, and I am grateful for the opportunity to be part of this program, which I find as very interesting and inspiring also to see that the religious sisters of the poor handmaids of Jesus Christ coming on board with the universal clarion call from church and our vows life as religious to be actively involved in the society in which we exist. So I think the issue I'll be sharing with will be able to help facilitate the goal of this program, Skills for the Mission, as you develop the skills and capacity of your sisters to be socially conscious. Thank you.
That's great. Welcome. So, would you like to share your screen with us at this time?
Thank you. I will do just that.
Okay.
Oh,
This is, yes, we're recording this on
yeah.
during Holy Week, and and I will let
Okay,
you. Yes, we can see it. Perfect.
that's my screen. Can you see
Yeah.
that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, shall we proceed?
Please do.
Okay. Yeah, the topic I given to speak on is social justice today in our world, taking conscious cognizance of the fact that the world we live today was not the world our founders lived in when they formed the congregation, but something remains the same, that at each time of the existence of religious congregations, we are called to respond to our time responsibly and actively. So rather than just talk about social justice today, I reframe this to be our discussion to be social question today, seeking the poor handmaid sisters of Jesus Christ response.
Hmm.
In other words, how are the sisters of the poor handmaids of Jesus Christ called to be socially responsive? And this is a program, this is a topic we're exploring within the entire program of Life Skills for the Mission 2023. And as I've been introduced by Sister Michelle, I sit at the Augustinian Center for Advocacy, Justice, and Peace. I've been involved with justice and peace issue of my order since almost 25 years in my priesthood. So what I'm going to be doing more is sharing experiences of what I have come to encounter as a religious being visible in our world today. So this will be how our presentation will proceed in terms of our, let me see. Okay.
Hmm. Sure.
So, okay, this is our outline. I would like us to see what we mean by social question. We will look at social question from the church's perspective. We look at social question from religious perspective. And then we look at what the social question is today. And then the utmost question, what must we do as religious? And then we'll look at what it means to take social justice action. And I just highlighted one of the social questions, such as environmental challenges. And then they end it with the call for action. And I will leave you with discussion questions that might guide you to do your discussion. The learning objective of this sharing is to empower the participants on making faith response to social issues by developing intervention based on identified gaps.
Mm.
In other words, at the end of this, I believe that everyone who have learned, stayed with us should be able to know what social questions are, how does our faith interface with it, and how do we develop interventions that are based on gaps that we have identified within our own social locations. Now, we'll start with what we mean by social question. I look at it from 2 points of view. I look at it from the point of view of definition, and then from the point of view of the causes of what social questions are. So in the first instance, we said that the question of social question concerns ordering the lives of the members of society so as to maintain the largest number of noble and happy human beings. In other words, the reason why we talk about social consciousness is for us to question the ordering of the lives and members of society, so that we maintain a large number of human citizens and the creation at large that live a happy life. And so social question is also based on always questioning of removing some obstacles to progress. We know that the aim of God who created humanity is that we can live to fulfillment of his desire for creating us. But there are obstacles in social issues, structures, and systems that make it difficult for us to achieve this fulfillment. And so social question, therefore, is for us to attempt to remove those obstacles so that all of us may have progress in terms of achieving our human development, human fulfillment as God desired. So, what could be the causes of the obstacle to our achieving such progress as embedded in the systems? We classify the obstacles into two. One is natural and the other is artificial. On the natural causes, we are looking at the cases of natural disaster. That is those things that are not caused by our action, but rather in the actions and the ordinary of the nature of a world, as it were, that obstruct our desire and our capacity to achieve our own progress. So we have various types of natural disaster: hurricane, fire, erosion, flooding, anything at all that is within the confines of natural acts. So in this case, we may not have too much to contribute to it as human beings. Now, the second cause of the obstacles to our progress is what the one we classify as artificial. And these are arising from the human ignorance and selfishness, which arouse the many to a sense of injustice and ending in oppressive institution. These are what we call systemic evil, systemic injustice, systemic suffering. In other words, the actions and inactions of humanity that are based either on ignorance or selfishness, that are embedded in systems and structure, which no one has responsibility over because they are not result of personal sins, but are the result of accumulation of those structures that make it difficult for people to rise to the opportunity of attending their fulfillment. We refer to this as systemic evil or systemic injustice or systemic structural suffering. So I hope this helps us to understand what social question is and then situating it within what we want to do to develop skills, life skills for the mission. And so we move now to what does the church say about social question? We look at this from 2 points of view. The first point of view is from the scriptural perspective. And then what is the implication of that scriptural perspective? And then what does the church teach in line with that? The first social question issue comes to us from the scripture within what we refer to as the command of love. We know that the summary of Jesus's presence in time is for him to fulfill the love of God for us. And that is why he is, as St. John tells us, that God is love and love is God, and to live in God is to live in love. And so St. John will go further to tell us that to love God above all is to love our neighbor as ourselves, just like Jesus Christ himself have said. And we see that the basis of judgment on the last day is based on the account of how much we live this love. And so we read from Matthew 25, 30 to 40. As Jesus said, on that last day, the Father will gather the people and separate them into two. And he will say to those on his right hand, "Come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. Truly I say to you, you did it." And then when they will ask him the question, well, when did we see you in all these situations and we help you? And he will come back to say to us, "Truly, truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me." So this is what we call the command of love. My patron Saint St. Augustine goes on to explain what this love is about. And in his homily on the first letter of St. John, St. Augustine will say to us, referring to giving food to the hungry, St. Augustine will not say, "You give big bread to the hungry, but it will be better. We are there, no one hungry, and you could give it to no one. You clothe a naked person, would that all were clothed, and the necessity did not exist." What St. Augustine is telling us here is that when it comes to acts of love for humanity, that love goes beyond providing material things to people, or what we refer to in social responsibility as material relief, which is the first basis of social action. And so Augustine is telling to us that the implication of love is a love that has two dimensions. In other words, a dimension that provides material relief and a dimension that asks questions, why do they have those needs? So St. Augustine, therefore, will summarize the commandment of love to say, in terms of ordering, we are called to love God and love our neighbor and self. But this love must start with loving of our neighbor. And he says this love of our neighbor must be practical. In other words, it has to be practical with giving food to the one who is hungry. But more so, it should, in dimension, it has two dimensions, material relief and social action for structural reform. This is where he will go on to say to us, work that nobody is hungry, work that nobody is naked, and work that nobody is homeless, so that you don't need to do charity. Now, the Christian implication of this, or what we draw from this, is that the impact from the scripture, or what I've just said also, we can find it in Isaiah, Micah, and in Jesus's actions, is that it reinforces that our Christian ministry must move from the temple to the street and from the soul of man to the whole of humanity. In other words, we must not just spiritualize every activity or put in a compartment actions that are religious and actions that are social. But one Christian ministry must take us to both the temple and to the society. In this organic togetherness, we achieve the salvation of humanity, which for God is man and woman fully alive, as St. Irenaeus will tell us. It is this understanding that the Second Vatican Council, in the mandate in Gaudium et Spes, section 1 of that, tells us that the joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, these are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. Indeed, nothing genuinely human fails to raise an echo in the hearts, on their hearts. For their hearts is a community composed of men, therefore united in Christ. They are led by the Holy Spirit in their journey to the kingdom of their Father, and they have welcomed the news of salvation, which is meant for every man. This means that this is why the community realizes that it is truly linked with humankind and its history by the deepest of bonds. This is Guardian Express, the first section of that. And this is where everything we do in social action is built upon as a church mandate. So, having understood what the church says about social question, let us see what religions have in particular with social question. Now, in the terms of religious and social question, we look at first the prophetic and evangelical nature of the vows we take. We know that our vows are called evangelical. Evangelical stems from the fact that they are prophetic, and prophetic comes from the fact that they are directed to the public. So our vows are not private vows. That is why we make them to the public, and that is why we leave them out in the public. So the very public nature of our vows in itself compels us to be physically alive to the social issues of our time. So every religious, by nature of our vows, are called to be social conscious persons because it is to the society that we are called to live out those vows. So we take that vow for in living in the social situation where we are. So in the 1978 document following the Vatican II, tells us that religious life and human promotion were this identifies it as prophetic and charismatic in witnessing to alternative way of living, modeled in the unit in the Trinity and serving as a challenge to society. This is who we are. And that takes us to a maybe some step backwards. So we say that in the founding and in the charism and mission of religious life, we are called to be socially conscious. In a symbolic way, yet practical way, the movement from hermitage to mendicancy, that is the very first time in those early first 11th century when the church, those who are living in religious hermits were called to come to the public to bear witness. This is to make sure that our prophetic character of the way of life bears on social issues. So that very founding itself is at the heart of social questions. And we see this in the various founders of religious life. What we see in their life is that they proclaim that word, that is the word of God, with their lives, with their lips, and with their action, speaking against evil and sin, even in the church or to the church leaders. So the consecrated for the sake of the kingdom, they never stop exploring new ways to live the gospel in their own concrete situation and in their expectation of God's kingdom coming. And I guess if you go back to the founder of your congregation, you will find out also that the reason why that congregation was founded was responding to the social question of that time. And so she brought the light of Christ's gospel to bear in that social issue of that time. And it continues to evolve as it goes. I will give an example from my own religious group of Augustinians. One, as Augustinians, our charism is community. And for Augustine, witnessing to the love of the communitarian God was not an abstract mission, but one with strong implication for social reality of his time. That is why community becomes his key word. And he will tell us in the first rule, above all things, you must be united heart and mind. And it is not a unity of just a few persons who come to embrace that life, but it's a unity that speaks to the harsh social realities of the time. And we saw it in his own examples that he spoke to the realities of the cities of a province of North Africa that he grew up. And so for us as Augustinian, our community charism compel us to strive to balance the intolerable West culture and the agonizing scarcity in the world, the oppressive attitudes of the status quo in the structures of various society and even ecclesiastical institutions that again serve as obstacle against humanity to create, to live the fullness of life that God has created them for. Now that takes us to our mission. Our mission as Augustinian is to bear witness as community in various aspects. And I took one of our apostolate, education. Why we engage in education, providing education for those who do not have, but we use Augustine's measure, critique of education, to critique both our own education curriculum and that of the government to know whose interests they serve by their educational agenda. So this is how we are living the social question of our time, in our charism, in our mission as Augustinians. And I also think that as the religious sisters of the poor handmaid of Jesus Christ, you must be interfacing in the little space where you are with social realities. So your charism, your mission, and returning back to your founder will always ask you, what is the social reality of the life you have been called to live? So having again established the link between the religious and the social question. The question we go now is, what are those social issues of our time? I just try to hold together various elements that are describing the social challenges of our time to which our vows are called to bear witness to. I highlight some of them here: environmental degradation, respect participation in governance, human rights protection and human rights violation, conflict and violence, poverty, um, gender-based violence, internal displacement and migration, and a whole lot of them. These constitute social challenges we have today upon which our life have been called to bear witness. And I illustrate these social questions with a typical African social question. Coming from Africa, living in Africa within this period of my witnessing, just look at some issues that I think we cannot be silent over as religious. Take, for instance, in poverty. We say that we know from statistics that 431 million people in Africa are still living in extreme poverty at the threshold of $1.90 per day, even though the United Nations had said we should step this up to $5 per day. Yet, even at $1.9, now Africans still have over 431 million people living in this condition. Look at climate change. 17 out of 20 countries that are threatened by climate change are in Africa. We see that 53.2 million people in Africa are still living in internal displacement as a result of conflict and violence in 2021, and it is exacerbating by each day. Now, we see that in this conflict, about 30 state-based conflicts have been recorded in 2021, resulting to 19,325 deaths related to battles. And then in migration, 43 million of Africans, overall 14% of the global migration population. You may like to know that the statistics of international migration today is at 281 million international migrants across the world. And Africa alone is sharing 14% of that. That is a huge sum. And this migration brings both hope, brings anxiety, and brings frustration for those who are engaged in it. These are kind of social questions that we are living with or living in at this material time. So what comes from here now is, what must we do? This is the basic question that this our sharing focuses on. What must we do? And what I suggest we do is that we must move from charity to justice. That is when our life begins to bear witness to social issue. And what does it mean to move from charity to justice? I was going to share experience with a reading from Ron Heiser. Most of you must have come across his book, Living God's Justice and Holy Longing. It's a beautiful work. In this little narrative, he said here, helps us to understand when our actions goes beyond material relief to begin to ask questions. In this, he gave a story of a city built beyond the bend of a large river. And it says that as the children were playing in the river one day, they noticed three human bodies floating in the water. They ran for help, and the villagers came, picked the dead, the three, buried the dead, put the wounded one in the hospital, and kept the child among them, waiting the care of one of the villagers. And then it happened that every day a number of bodies came floating down the river. And every day the villagers came to the various needs of the victims. Then it became the order of the day that the community developed a more elaborate system to deal with these cases. Some of the townsfolk became quite generous in tending to those bodies, and a few extraordinary ones even gave up their jobs so that they could tend to this concern full time. And the town itself felt a certain health pride in its generosity. If I leave this as a case study for you and ask you a question, what is your impression on this? If you take a critical analysis of this, what you'll be getting is where we are heading to at a time when we can call an action a social justice action or a humanitarian action that is just based on relief material. So what we get from here is what I'm moving from charity to justice. That is, in most cases, our response as religious people would be like this town, the village members of this town. Most religious congregations have a very established form of help. We build schools, we set money to send people to school, we build hospitals, we do all those things to provide for the lack of the people in society. But many of us have not taken the other responsibility of asking the question, but why are there many people with no food, no house, no school, no health services? Because it is only when we ask these questions that we are now stepping into the threshold of justice action. And so in summary, I say that moving from charity to justice, harass the need for the religious to shift focus from using charity to fill the gaps created by negligence of government on issues of social justice by addressing more directly the root causes of these social issues embedded in systemic unjust structures. So if we have answered this question well, then it takes us to that social justice action. What is social justice action? We go to Proverbs chapter 31, verse 8. It tells us to be a social justice actor, you must open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. And what does that mean to us? It says we cannot be silent, we must speak up, we must provide support, and we must realize the power we have. Then, how do we make this practical? How do we make this practical? That takes us to the how and the steps to social action. The first thing we do in social justice action is to listen. And this is what I call being alive to your own environment, being aware of the environment where you live. So you listen to their environment. Be in contact with where you live. Listening to there is knowing what is happening around you. And when you listen to that environment, then you learn from that environment, that community, what the issues are. And when you learn those issues, then you get into analysis. Then what you're analyzing is that you're analyzing what you have heard and what you have learned. And this will help you to organize strategies that will lead you to action. And then when you undertake that action, then you also have a time to have a reflection on the actions that you have taken so that you know the practices and policies and behaviors of individuals, organizations, and states or systems that are needed to be changed. And this will lead to what we call transformation that we expect to happen. So if we want to take them one by one, the first step is you listen, and the second step is you learn. And when you learn, you analyze, you take action, and then you have a reflection on your action to see how effective it is, leading to the transformation you are leading. And so, in a nutshell, it helps us to have what we call a cyclic process that happens within the sphere of being socially conscious in the environment where you live. So, as I said, I take an example of the global environmental challenges to say as an example of things we can do. Today, the church calls us to be environmental conscious. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis reminds us that the earth is our common homeland, and we all have responsibility to make sure that we use it judiciously and preserve it for the generations to come. And so this goes back to even in 1971 in Pacem in Terris, Pope Paul VI had also cried of the humanity's action that is degrading the nature. And this is where each and every one of us are called to be responsible. So if you take that as one of the areas you want to look at, environmental challenges, so the question will be, what we necessarily have to do to take action on that. And I look at here the power of our collective action on sustainable environment. For instance, as sisters of the poor handmaid of Jesus Christ, you want to be environmentally conscious. You have the strength of your collective action. You are spread across the globe. So what are the powers of this collective action? One, we have the strength in number, the number of the sisters you have, and the number of connectivity with other congregations and other like minds, even civil organizations that work on that. And when we do that, we find out that when we unite for a shared goal and collective voice, then it has a potential to influence policies, practices, and industries to take a better social responsible action to protect the environment. And that will lead us to a strategic awareness and advocacy that will help us to increase public consciousness in the way of driving change at local, national, and international level. And what we will get as a result is economic transformation and social transformation that will ensure sustainability as people begin to reshape their thoughts and works to ensure sustainable practices. So, um, colleagues and friends, this is the time for action where I call the sisters of the poor handmaid of Jesus Christ to take action in responding to social questions of our time. And to do that, I present a few discussion points for you. And I would want you to discuss or identify the social issues for religious action in your area. And I am asking you to identify three most pressing social challenges today around you. And when you identify that, I want you to also set up strategies for collaborative response among the poor handmaid sisters. In this case, you are looking at strategies and practical actions that foster interregional collaboration among yourself, promoting poor handmaid sisters' response to the most pressing social issues of our time. And I say thank you as I end this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. If you want to stop sharing your screen, great, great. You're back on the screen. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for that background, for that foundation of it, and the foundation from which emanates all of our action. And then in particular, I thought the action strategies where we go from listening to learning to analyzing, and analyzing might be the challenge for us, and move it to action, reflection, and then transformation. That is a very succinct way to describe what is our call and then our call to action. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. We really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Yes. And so glad you're with us. We'll see you also at the end of the month.
Thank
And there
you.
will be a panel of about 3 people who will be discussing some of the major issues of today as well. So at that point, this ends our recording for today.